Hey, it's me, Saul, and this is a bit different from what I usually do on my channel. You don't usually see all of this in a video that's specifically for YouTube. But I wanted to make a discussion video on the topic of Hey Trunade, the card. It's a super rare back from a mini box way back when. You see it on the screen here. You know what it is if you play Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, and the subject of whether or not it should be banned. Now, I've been seeing a lot of conversations arising in various communities, and I wanted to throw my hat in the ring because I strongly disagreed with a couple of things that people were saying about why they think the card should be banned. Now, in particular, there was a YouTuber, well, you must know Playmaker Duel Links, right? He's a great content creator. I love his content. He made a video talking about whether or not Hey Trunade should be banned and giving his opinions. Now, I tend to write scripts. I tend to, well, that's a complete lie. I tend to write out guidelines of what I think a video should be, then I record, then I edit, then I do all that kind of stuff. And so I started doing that for a video almost in response to his when I had first watched it. It came out like 2 weeks ago at this point. And by the time I got done with like the bullet points and then like editing, like it felt too official. It felt like an attack. Which it absolutely wasn't, because I handle most of like my editing and my work like in a very, like, I try to be very snappy with it. So I thought the best way to try and tackle something like this is in a conversational format where I just give my ideas. It's a lot more human, it's a lot more personal. So you can tell by my tone of voice and the expression on my face, like this is, I have full, in fact, go watch the video where he talks about why he thinks Hey Trunade should be banned. I'm going to, some of the points that I'll be making in this will be directly in opposition to what he says. But that being said, he's a great content creator. He's been playing this game a lot longer than me. I completely respect his opinion. Now, I'm sure you noticed the cut there. That's probably going to be the only edit in the video. I want this to be my very unfiltered, raw take on this. So excuse me if I stutter, excuse me if I make mistakes and that kind of thing. But I want to give this a shot. Just having like a conversation with you that you can come back to, just listen, kind of just like chill and everything. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Comment down below your thoughts on Hey Trunade. And also, if you're new to the channel, hi, welcome. It's me, Saul. Consider liking and maybe also subscribing if you'd like to see not more of this, because I don't do this often, but like more things that I have to say. Moving on. In order to make this somewhat interesting, like give it a little bit of spice, because like if you know me, you know that I don't like just doing one thing and being like, okay, there, done, right? So I wanted to add an extra layer to this discussion. So I'm going to put myself on a timer, but I already have a series where I put myself on a timer. So instead of a timer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the NPC auto duel all of the current duelists, right? I'm gonna have the computer auto do all the current duelists, and if I'm not done with my points by the time it's done, then I just don't get to finish. That way I don't run on for too long like I'm doing right now. So let's get started. I'm just gonna set this up and we can begin. So Hey Trunade. Now, like I said, I wrote a script about this, so I'll be referencing that here and there. But Hey Trunade is a card that bounces back all of your back row on the field. Just anything that's on the field that is set gets bounced back to the hand. If you can activate a card before Hey Trunade goes off, then it gets to be activated, but like everything else gets bounced back. Jesus Christ, slow down. Hey yo, okay. So here's all right, let's get right into the nitty and gritty, right? Now, in my opinion, if you only so Hey Trunade is a card that has the potential to bounce back 3 cards from your opponent's back row back into their hand. Right now, if your opponent, let's say your opponent goes first, they set 1 card, it comes over to your turn, and you Hey Trunade them. Yes, they've lost that back row, but if anything, I'm not gonna cheat. I have to start the next duel. Oh wait, nice things. Never mind. But yeah. If your opponent only has 1 piece of back row, then it's the same as any other card, if not better for you, because assuming that you survive until the next turn, you got that piece of back row back rather than having been Cosmic Cycloned or MST'd, right? Now, that's if they have 1 piece of back row set. That 1 card, Hey Trunade, is just like any other back row removal in that situation. Now, in a situation where my opponent has 3 pieces of back row set, yes, Hey Trunade gives me the power to get, Hey Trunade gives me the power to get rid of all of them without really having to worry about dealing with them. I'm able to make my plays unrestricted. And the argument that was made there was, if my opponent bounces back all of my back row, then that's not interactive. You know, I don't get to play. I don't get to like go back and forth with my opponent. But my counter to that is, if my opponent sets 3 and passes, then their whole plan is to prevent me from playing, right? I have to start the next duel, right? The whole plan there is to prevent me from playing. You don't want to interact with me. I summon a monster, Karma Cut. I play through the Karma Cut, summon another monster, Fiendish Chain. I play through the Fiendish Chain, summon another monster. I was about to say Treacherous Trap Hole, but it wouldn't work in that order, but you get what I mean, right? Like, it's just... if my opponent sets 3 pass, they don't want to interact with me. So I'm doing what I can to survive in that situation, because this was a horrible mistake. This was a horrible mistake, right? So I'm actually gonna read off of a little bit of what I've said here, right? Because if the argument is about fun, if it's about Hey Trunade not being fun, if it's about it not being interactive, set 3 pass isn't interactive. Set 3 pass isn't fun, right? So the point that I've made now is, if you set 1 piece of back row, Hey Trunade is the same as any other back row removal. If you set 3 back row pass, then at that point, to me anyway, and I get it, some people might not agree with this perspective, but if you set 3 pass, you deserve to be Hey Trunaded, because you weren't trying to interact with me anyway, right? You weren't trying to play with me. You were trying to shut me down completely, not give me any room to breathe, and win off of that. I don't know why my alarm is going off. It's 1 p.m. Okay, so let's continue. Let's continue, right? The next argument that was made, the next argument that was presented, that I've seen not just from Playmaker Duel Links, but also from various people, is that it doesn't make sense that 1 card is causing all of these decks to receive a limit 2. You know, it went through, it caused, it's caused a limit 2 in Dragunity, it caused a limit 2 here and there and there, and what they say is, it's easier to just ban the 1 card rather than having every single deck receive a limit 2. And personally, I'm not looking at you because I have to look at that personally. It's not, I don't view that as a straw man, but I view that as an unfair way of looking at the situation, right? I would argue that decks aren't being limited for Hey Trunade. It's definitely a factor in why some decks are being limited, but hear me out. Let me read exactly what I have written here, right? If a deck consistently OTKs, then back row is just the last line of defense that a person has, right? Which is important, but in a 4,000 life point meta with a 20 card deck that has the ability to have draw power and search cards and all that kind of stuff, I think having a consistent OTK deck is inherently a problem. The deck itself is anything that will consistently, like an 80% chance to just 1-tap your opponent, not give them room to breathe, not give them room to do anything, in my opinion, is problematic in any meta with or without Hey Trunade, right? So, and this is why I say 80%, because being OTK'd is fine, but if it's almost statistically guaranteed that if I go second, I will kill you, then I would argue that a deck like that needs to have their consistency adjusted, right? The limit 2 effectively kills 2 birds with 1 stone. They can no longer abuse Hey Trunade by saying, okay, you don't get the last line of defense that you would have, you don't get to have that anymore. But at the same time, a deck that was too strong for what we have in Duel Links right now gets its power adjusted, in my opinion. So it's not that, oh yeah, Hey Trunade is the reason why all these good strong decks are being banned. I feel like it's more so that you have this very strong deck that needs to be nerfed. This strong deck is also abusing Hey Trunade. Well, we need to take Hey Trunade away from the deck, but this deck is too consistent, so we need to reduce their I don't see Hey Trunade as being the sole cause for the limitation, right? So yeah, another thing that I have written in this, in what would have been the bullet points to a script is, Hey Trunade isn't the only top tier card with the limit 2. You have Treacherous Trap Hole, you have Neo's Fusion, right? Like in Playmaker Duel Links video, I believe he made an honest mistake where he says that Lunalight Crimson Fox was limited to 2 for Hey Trunade. It wasn't limited to 2 for Hey Trunade, it was limited for Neo's Fusion. Hey Trunade isn't the only culprit in cards being set to 2. There's just a lot of powerful cards that are at 2, and so some of these decks that have the potential to use these top tier cards receive the limit 2 as well. That's not me saying that Hey Trunade isn't one of those cards, but I'm saying that it's a balance, right? At that point, you could, well, no, you would, I don't want to present a straw man and say, oh, you could argue that any card, all the cards at 2 should just outright be banned. I feel like that's a bit of a straw man in and of itself, but it's not the sole responsibility of Hey Trunade to determine whether or not a deck gets hit in the meta, right? So yeah, I think that if a deck has very strong strategies in and of itself, like Harpies inherently have strong strategies, they don't deserve to use the cards. If a card is set to 2, it means it's very powerful. You like I said, Neo's Fusion, Hey Trunade, the coin flip card, what's it called again? Head Judging, right? If a deck is as strong as a top tier deck generally is, I think it doesn't need that extra power, right? It's oppressive at that point. This is going a lot faster than I expected it to be. Jesus Christ. And yeah, so continuing on with the point, right? How do I put this? Because I want to convey what and this was actually one of the points that made me reconfigure the video, right? So first of all, it's not that 50 cards have been hit because of one card, right? Hey Trunade is a reason, not the reason. Because of Hey Trunade and other important cards and the overall consistency of a given deck is why that deck was hit. I don't think blaming Hey Trunade is fair. Sorry, I know I said I wouldn't cut again, but I got distracted. Here's the thing. I know you could counter, I want to be balanced, right? Because the perfect counter to the argument that I've put forward is, well, if there's a consistent OTK, Hey Trunade is the direct counter to that, or rather, if there's a consistent OTK, then back row is the direct counter to that consistent OTK, because like I said before, it's the last line of defense, effectively, and I get that, right? But then that takes me back to my first point, where if you have one piece of back row, then any back row removal card would have done the exact same thing, and then if you have 3 pieces of back row, you can't really point the finger at your opponent saying, oh, you're being uninteractive, it's this, it's that, because you were doing the exact same thing. I can't talk. You were doing the exact same thing, right? Now, if you have 2 pieces of back row, then you're in the middle ground, right? You're in the middle ground, and that kind of makes it a 50-50, which is fair enough, but here's the thing. None of what I've said is actually my main point. Right? None of what I've said is my main point. The reason being, Hey Trunade is talked about in the perspective of OTKs, right? Of, okay, you know, they Hey Trunade you and then they one-turn kill. I get that, because Hey Trunade means that you can set your board up and not have to worry about anything. But what rings true to me is you can set your board up. I actually agree that Hey Trunade shouldn't be abused in OTK decks. But I believe that Hey Trunade is essential, and here's my reasoning for it. I'll use the Boojins as an example. I use the Boojins a lot. It's a somewhat slow deck, right? I need to be able to get started. I need to be able to set up a board, not because I want to kill you this turn, but because you set 3 and passed it back to me, I don't get to build a board. I don't get to get my resources together to play through you, right? But if I bounce back your back row, I'm then able to establish a board and pass it back to you, right? Then you get to play and I get to play. Whereas with you setting 3 and passing, had I not Hey Trunaded, you would have Karma Cut, Fiendish Chain, Treacherous Straphold, all of that stuff, and I wouldn't have gotten to play it all. Right, so I think that it's actually, the Boojins is just an example. There are various decks like that where they want to be able to set up, but there's a lot of back row in the meta. Like a point was made in the video that a lot of the top tier decks don't use back row, and I actually disagree with that point, because in the list the meta changes week to week, and the list that was used in the video, I believe he pointed, Water XYZs was on the list, but he didn't mention, Water XYZs uses tons of back row. They're the ones who will generally set 3 and pass, especially if they brick. So Water XYZs is there. Even Onomats use the occasional Book of Moon, right? Like every deck, except maybe Thunder Dragons, I would say, uses a degree of back row. Even heroes use Mass Change, and that's not to disrupt you, but then everyone has back row. And the heroes, it's a moot point. I don't want to dig too much into that because it doesn't really matter. That's not the point that I'm making. This is just a nitpick, and I apologize, right? So going back onto my... Hi, sweetie. How long have you been waiting outside?
A while.
Oh,
By your door.
I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I'm actually not done, but I'm trying a different form of video. How was the trip? No problem. Okay, I'm
You're gonna forget. I bought you long life milk.
long life milk.
So now you don't have to waste milk.
Okay, that's
Whenever you want it, you just open one.
that is Wow. I'm still recording. Right, so if you're strong enough and consistent enough to OTK consistently, that was a bad sentence, but if you have the power to do that, then in my opinion, you should receive a limit 2 anyway. You should receive some sort of limitation. Hey Trunade is just the thing that hits the nail on the head, right? That's just the perfect limit. The limit 2 has tons of strong cards. I don't think that it's Hey Trunade's fault that decks are being limited, so I don't think that that's a good argument. So that's my counter argument as to why Hey Trunade. The argument was made that Hey Trunade is to blame for these decks being limited. I argue that it's not, and then on top of that, like I've said, Hey Trunade is necessary for being able to set up in a back row heavy meta, right? Because my opponent doesn't want me to play, but I want to play. I want to set up a board, but I also agree that it's not good in OTK strategies. But then that being said, if my opponent sets 3 and passes, then they can't really point a finger at me saying that I'm not interacting with them because they didn't want to give me a chance to set up in the first place. Now, I could play through that, maybe I will, and obviously that doesn't account for some cards will be bluffs and everything, and I get that. There is a degree of decision making there. This is just a general point that I'm making. I understand that, but I still think that there is a value to be had in being able to set up, pass it back to your opponent, and then like if Hey Trunade said that your opponent didn't take any battle damage for the rest of the turn, I would actually love it even more. I don't need it for a 1-turn kill. My main thing for Hey Trunade is that it allows me to set up safely. I'm so used to recording like pre-recorded video. Like I paused in the middle. I paused because like that's what I would usually do when I'm about to make an edit. But yeah. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the gatekeeper argument, right? Playmaker made an argument that so some people were making an argument that Hey Trunade is a gatekeeper to prevent a trap heavy meta, and he disagreed with that, and I also disagree with that, but for a different reason. I disagree with his disagreement. No one show him this video. I sound like an idiot. But in this is all in good faith. I'm obviously not taking shots, but in terms of the argument that was presented by him, well, as for the gatekeeper argument, how do I put this? Hey Trunade isn't the only back row removal in the game, right? People build decks expecting that, okay, at some point I might be interrupted, but they're not gonna go specifically like, oh, what if I... They're not gonna go specifically, what if I get Hey Trunaded, you know? There's Cosmic, there's MST, there's all these things. If your strategy requires back row removal, I'm cheating. If your strategy requires back row removal, then you're going to insert it in there anyway and do what you can to have your strategy still succeed, right? Now, here's the problem with his counter though, right? Hey Trunade is in the meta, and I say in the meta because, how do I put it? The argument was made that Hey Trunade comes, so before talking about the gatekeeper argument, he makes the argument that, okay, you know, Hey Trunade comes in, a new deck comes out, it abuses Hey Trunade on the ladder for 2 months, and then it gets removed, and we have to wait for that. And then he follows that up with the argument that, oh, if a card is constantly removed from the meta, then it's not in the meta, so how can it impact the meta? I don't feel like those two arguments can exist at the same time. I don't think you can say that the deck, oh, it's a problem because, you know, the card is in, it's around on the ladder for too long, it's in the meta for too long, and they're too slow to remove it from the meta, and then also argue that it's not in the meta, so it's not impacting the meta. I personally just, I took issue with the train of thought, but I also disagree with the gatekeeper argument, so it literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm really bad at this. Okay, so I haven't done too badly. 1 battle left, and I'm just about done with everything I had to say. That was terrible. The last thing that I wanted to put out there is, I agree with the argument that having OTK decks running around of using Hey Trunade is not fun. It's not healthy. I think it's a problem that it takes so long for these cards to be adjusted, but I don't think that the answer is banning Hey Trunade. The answer is something that I know will probably never happen, and I think the answer is playtesting. When a deck is supposed to come out, have people play test it, see if there's any broken combos that will come with it, and if it needs that limit 2, release it with that limit 2. That way, if someone invests in a deck, they shouldn't have to worry about it being hit. They just know, okay, if I'm buying into it, I do it with the knowledge that I can only use 2 of this card, right? That would just make it so much easier. Wow, I got absolutely wrecked. I feel like that would fix the whole issue along with a slew of other things in the game, but realistically speaking, I don't think Konami will ever do that because they don't love us. Right? So that's everything. That's it. I'm done now because I'm out of duelists. I guess to round up, I'll say that if Trunade were gone, then I think a viable card that allows for slower strategies to start up in a trap heavy meta, that would be lost. And I don't think that that's very fair. Like, I hate losing to set 3 pass, but I also understand that some people hate losing to Trunade OTK. So I know that bouncing back the back row isn't interactive, but as I've said multiple times, like, neither is an exceedingly trap heavy strategy. I don't even just mean traps, there's also spells, Book of Moon, all that kind of stuff, right? So I claim that that isn't interactive either. So on that note, as long as you survive the turn after getting Trunaded, I think it's fine, to be honest with you, because you get your back row back, you can use it again, your opponent is set up, but you lived, you took some damage, but you can play back. We're playing together, we're going back and forth, so I don't think that it's as bad as people say, personally. Full respect to anyone who disagrees. This is a discussion video. The point of discussions is dissent. So if you have a problem with what I've said, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this different style of video. I'm gonna be trying out different things. I have exams coming up, some of you may know, and so my highly edited styles of video that take me a lot longer to do will be coming in lower increments leading up to my exams in August before I get back on track. So I'm trying out other things that are less edit heavy to see what works. So let me know if you enjoyed this, and I'll do more of it. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day. Bye.